Welcome to the Reason Roundtable, your weekly libertarian podcast that does not take May 1st off because we want to spend the entire day laughing at communists. I am Matt Welch, joined by Nick Gillespie, Peter Suderman, and Katherine Mangu-Ward. Roundtablists of the world, unite!
Howdy, Matt.
Hey, Matt.
Happy Monday, and while it's a little bit early, may the 4th be with you.
Ooh, the real holiday.
I'm already dead inside. We're going to talk about a lot of internal death and the political world's most exciting announcement of last week here in a moment. But first, a famous mustache, Saturday Night Live sketches, a college professor who's a Doja Cat fan. What do these three things have in common? Yes, they're all part of the wild world of Jeopardy. That's right. I'm here to tell you about a brand new podcast called This Is Jeopardy, the story of America's favorite quiz show. This Is Jeopardy peels back the curtain on the legacy of the brain-tickling program and takes you behind the scenes of the game that's kept us guessing, laughing, and cheering for more than 60 years. Wow. Each week celebrates different favorite moments from Jeopardy's rich history, with stories from contestants, staffers, and fans, from the early days with Art Fleming to the rise of Alex Trebek to Ken Jennings' historic run, and much, much more. Hosted by Buzzy Cohen, you can find and listen to This Is Jeopardy right now, wherever you get your podcasts. Do it today. You'll be glad you did. Okay, before we get started, just wanted to give a huge shout out to everyone who came out last week to our special live taping in New York City, Cape Pasa, New York. Nick Gillespie, we had so much fun that we might do that again. I don't know. Maybe some other city. We'll see. But anyway, so as mentioned that night, which you'll be hearing sometime soon, I guess, or even watching, but not really expounded on beyond a reference. Last week, President Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. made it official. He's gonna, he's gonna do the thing. He's running for reelection along with America's very favorite Veep, Kamala Harris. Their campaign slogan: "Together, we can finish the job." Katherine, in his announcement video, the president said, and I quote, "The question we are facing in the years ahead is whether we're going to have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer, and, quote, Reason, of which you are the editor, is objectively pro-freedom and objectively pro-rights. So is the Biden-Harris ticket indeed the standard bearer for these important goals?" I will say the
Biden-Harris ticket does seem at least to be the standard bearer for being grammatically correct. I appreciate that he went with the correct, the lesses, the fewers, the mores. It was good. He did good work there. So credit where it's due. And now a bunch of condemnation. Obviously, this is not the ticket of freedom. Is there a ticket of freedom? No. Both parties will not be bringing us more freedom. And so there is that to keep in mind. I actually find the "let's finish the job" framing just deeply sinister. Like, it has so much après moi le déluge energy. Like, well, I, an ancient man, will spend 4 more years, and then whatever can be done will have been done. We are finished. The whole thing about governing a nation is that the job is never finished, and that's actually kind of a good thing. The sort of millenarianism or like apocalypticism embedded in "let's finish the job" skeeves me out. Don't love that.
So the slogan should have been, "Let's just keep doing the job for a little while longer"?
Yes. Like, I recognize that's not catchy, but that is in fact what presidents should think of themselves as doing, is kind of just keeping this thing running and hopefully improve it a bit and then hand it to the next guy peacefully, please.
Let's be a decent caretaker for a while, as long as I can pronounce my words. Nick, Biden said in his announcement, and this is kind of a familiar framing, this is our moment. So are you feeling the momentum, Nick?
The momentum, the Joe-mentum? Yeah, I think he should have been, he should have reduced the sites and just be like, "Let's finish the sentence." And people...
I I think we should give Biden credit.
People would be like, okay, you know what? He can clear that bar.
Completion rate is higher than Donald Trump's.
More slurring if we're really going to be talking about performance here.
Yeah, and there's definitely more the loose chopper effect, kind of where like his dentures are slipping. But you know what I liked? I will tell you what I liked about Biden, the video that he put out and things like that. One, he's like, he's putting it out there. Kamala is definitely going to be his vice president unless she, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., gets killed by the CIA, as certain high-profile libertarians kind of are suggesting that all political murders of the past 1,000 years were done by the CIA. But, she's there. I like the fact that he's talking about freedom and rights, even if he doesn't really know what they are. But he doesn't have to be the freedom candidate. He just has to be less scary than the inevitable Republican, opponent, who, if it's Donald Trump, I think it's not even going to be a close contest. And in that video that accompanied his announcement, he went through everything. He starts with MAGA extremists, and that's who he's saying. Like, that's the crisis. MAGA, whatever, however the fuck you pronounce it, extremists are on the march. And then he talks about Social Security cuts, which most Republicans want to, they also are against Social Security cuts, banning books, abortion rights, gay marriage, voting rights, and then, kind of like getting on with things. And, it's a pretty good picture that he paints, because what are the Republicans going to come back with? Oh, yeah, we do actually want to get all the gays out of everything. We need to get Bud Light back to being a manly drink and not a transgender thing. We got to start eating pudding with our fingers to show that we are the tough guy party. I don't know. I mean, it's depressing as hell to think that, once again, I was thinking about this over the weekend, I guess. The 2004 election was the one that South Park memorialized as the choice between a giant douche and a turd sandwich. This is that on, I don't know, human growth hormone or something like that, or, on old age pills or something. This is what we have going forward is going to be one of the grimmest spectacles, I think, in American political history. And my only real hope for it is that it is the definitive end of an epoch in America, which we could largely call either the long 20th century or the boomer period.
The new Nick Gillespie shirt. It really is ending this time.
That's right.
Peter, kind of building on Nick's point, it's clear that Biden's messaging here is that we're not done having to fend off ultra MAGA. And that's kind of the selling part. But what I was struck by, not just in the video and the sort of announcement, but also in seeing the few people in the world who are trying to say, no, Biden has actually been doing a good job. I saw Bill Maher on Friday kind of do this, and other types. None of this, including Biden's own kind of pitch out there, really mentions the job that he's done. Didn't we pass a bunch of $1 trillion things that were supposed to be transformative? Do you think that is going to be a preview of what we see? Are they kind of embarrassed by that, or is this just that the ultra MAGA stuff works better than trying to tell people that the infrastructure has been fixed?
I think Joe Biden is going to campaign at sort of two levels, and he's going to campaign at the micro level on actual policies that he passed, specifically the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act. And those are going to be the things that he talks about the most. But he's not going to talk about those in big public forums designed to say, hey, everybody, America, vote for me. He's going to talk about those in little tiny speeches in front of factories where, 500 union members show up, and he's going to say, hey, look, we dumped a ton of money into union stuff and into building some factories right here on this site where we eminent domain some people out of their homes. Right. And that's because the problem with Joe Biden's policies, with the big picture legislation that he has passed, is that the benefits are not actually very obvious to most Americans. Sure, he can say, oh, you know, we're going to onshore domestic manufacturing of the computer chips, and we're going to national security, something or other, green jobs, all of that. But like, that's not actually happening yet. There's just a giant money funnel that is going out to build factories that might start production in a couple of years or maybe not at all. And in the meantime, are mostly just sort of clearing ground by taking people's homes. Again, I just cannot stress how much of this is built on, like, literally built on other people's property, homes that have been eminent domained or kind of sort of eminent domained by saying, you know, if you don't sell, we do have this eminent domain power. I don't know. Just consider that, right? And so there is going to be that kind of micro messaging. But then the macro stuff is all going to be anti-MAGA, you know, the Trump forces, dark, whatever, like it's all going to be negative about Donald Trump. And frankly, that's not crazy given that in the midterms, Democrats overperformed. And it's pretty clear that at least one of the drivers, and possibly the main driver, was that voters who were persuadable thought that Republicans just were not ready for prime time and were not going to be responsible with the reins of the federal government. And so looking back at the most recent election and the results there and why voters made the choices that they did, it's not crazy for Joe Biden to say, look, the real reason to vote for me is the other guy is worse.
I will also just point out that Biden currently, according to Real Clear Politics, has a 64% disapproval rate and a 43% approval rate or people think the country's going in the right direction. 64% think it's going in the wrong track. Biden has a 43% approval rating, which are these are Trump-like numbers, given the period in Trump's presidency and things like that. So, you know, Biden is going on a, you know, it's morning in America type thing, or at least in his initial thing, kind of like Reagan did. The difference was in 1984, the country, the economy, everything was turning around in a way where nothing substantial, nothing real has changed. And as Peter is pointing out, or I guess you did, Matt, that like, you know, the economy is not great. The world situation isn't great. Nobody has a lot of trust or confidence in Biden. But, you know, you don't have to be, the best. You just have to be better than your inevitably shitty opponent.
Biden is going to have a hard time running on his agenda because his agenda is not obviously popular, because inflation is actually the thing that voters care about most in terms of the economy right now. And inflation is, even if it has moderated from its peak, inflation is still bad. Prices are still up. We are expecting yet another interest rate hike from the Fed here, and it doesn't look like the Fed is going to pivot and moderate and pull interest rates back down this year.
Katherine, you're a lady. I'm going to read you some headlines of recent ones about our vice president. This is like a Rorschach test or a little knee reflex, friend. Okay. Jonathan Capehart, MSNBC. GOP attacking Kamala Harris shows her strength ahead of 2024 election. San Jose Mercury News. A good week for Kamala Harris. Robin Ebkarian, LA Times. By helping Kamala Harris, Biden can help himself to a second term. And Ron Klain, per Politico headline, Sexism and racism are part of the problem with Harris. Right. Criticism. So, Katherine.
If only she were a lesbian, then it could be sexism, racism, and homophobia.
If only the sexism of Nick Gillespie would prevent him from interrupting the lady answer, Nick.
I was interrupting you, Matt. Whatever. Are you a lady? I don't think so.
Katherine, are you suffering from internalized misogyny in your inability to recognize how potent of a politician Kamala Harris is?
Yeah, probably. That sounds right. Thank you for that. No, I mean, she's been shockingly bad, and there is just very, very wide consensus at how bad she has been. People who really, really, really wanted to like her. Still, I mean, those headlines are not actually like the headlines are all double negatives, right? It's all like the best we can say here about Harris is that the people who hate her seem to be not great. That's not praise, actually. So I thought that you were going to say, Katherine, you're a lady. What do you think about the abortion stuff in the Biden announcement? Because that was
it was honestly a coin toss. So you can go run with that.
Can I do abortion?
No, seriously.
I think that was the part in the Biden video that resonated with me the most, because I actually am worried about what's happening with abortion law in this country. And I don't think I'm alone in that, right? Like, there's a reason that was featured so prominently. And it's a thing that's actually in flux, which is what's different than all the other stuff that he named, right? So he had Social Security and tax rates and access to voting. And I simply don't believe that those things are going to meaningfully change in the next 4 years. Whereas a lot of stuff's going on with abortion, but Joe Biden has the least control over that, right? And Kamala Harris, I suppose, doubly so. That's the business of the courts. It's the business of the states. It's the business of Congress. And so running on that also in the end feels kind of disingenuous. Like, my first administration saw one of the largest losses of rights to women in recent history. Reelect me so that we can, I guess, keep working on that.
I mean, nominate judges, and there's my God, we've spent the last month in a nonstop fire hose of anti-Republican Supreme Court justices, and they're secretly corrupt because George Mason University has a Scalia Center or some crap like that. It was like front page above the fold, New York Times, absolute nothing burger of a story trying to get us shocked by all of that. But Nick, to Katherine's point, Ron DeSantis signed a 6-week abortion bill. Like, this ad from Biden is definitely like ultra MAGA, blah, 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 with the expectation that Trump will win the nomination, which is still probably the correct betting position to take. I haven't looked at the betting markets, but I'm sure Maxim Lott will point
which are never wrong, except for increasingly every election.
But Ron DeSantis is going to be wearing that around his neck like Flava Flav, like a necklace, for a long time. As soon as if he were to get the nomination, that's it. That's what Biden will run on. And he's got Kamala Harris, and he's a Democrat and won't nominate Republican justices. And that's the campaign right there, is it not, Nick Gillespie?
Probably not, because abortion is important. And I do think it's a big, it's definitely in the Democrats' favor right now, because it turns out that even in conservative states, ridiculous extreme bans on women's reproductive rights are incredibly unpopular. So, I think it's a potent weapon on the Democrat side. And it's not simply to say, elect us and then we'll elect judges who in 25 years will be senior enough to overturn all the shit that's going on now. He can make a pitch that, get a Democratic Congress that will pass a federal law guaranteeing certain abortion rights. I mean, and whether or not that's possible, it's a pretty good selling point, I think, for a lot of people. But abortion isn't the only issue. I mean, it's always a suite of different things going on. And I think most importantly, what Biden will be doing, and I think is already doing, and I think the Republicans are already also doing this, who, if it's not Trump, they're going to say our person, the nominee is Trump, but better. He's a sane Trump. He's MAGA. Vivek Ramaswamy, who Zach Weismuller and I talked to last week for an hour and a half, is running on a platform called America First 2.0. I mean, no Republican is going to say, I am anti-Donald Trump. No Republican who gets the nomination is going to get it by saying Donald Trump was a complete failure. I renounce him and all of his works. And we're going back to, a ideologically limited government GOP. They're all going to be running on Trump did a great job, and it's now us to pick up the torch and finish what he started. So tying the Republicans to Trump is the perfect move.
One point before we semi-pivot is that last week there were two national Democratic polls which were pretty similar to one another, and it showed on average that featured the three people who are running for president for the Democratic Party who have announced, which is Biden, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Marianne Williamson going for her second run. The other two candidates have averaged together 28.5% of the vote, which sure means they're down by 40 percentage points, but also Donald Trump was never more than or less than about 80 percentage points up in 2020. Biden right now is in a far more vulnerable position in his primary this year than Donald Trump ever was against Bill Weld and Joe Walsh and Mark Sanford and whoever else back then. RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson were both kind of kooky, a little goofy around the gills. I'm being euphemistic. I'll be writing about this later on this week, but that vulnerability is clearly registering in the eyeballs of the Gavin Newsoms of the world. I predict that you will see somebody who isn't objectively bizarre come in and challenge Biden at some point, and Biden himself must be kind of aware of the interesting softness of that number.
If he could, he would be shitting himself, Matt Welch.
I don't even know how to work myself through all of that. All right, one related topic.
The good thing about the coming 2024 election is there's going to be a lot of elder humor.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's actually, that is in fact a thing that we should bring up because it's pretty clearly driving a lot of the concerns from Democrats about Biden. So there are polls that show simultaneously about 3/4 of Democrats approve of Biden's performance. That's reasonably good, maybe not great for within your own party. And that those same polls will show that fewer than 50% of Democrats want him to run for a second term. Now, obviously, he is running for that second term. That seems to me to be driven by concerns about his age and about how that is going to affect his performance. And Biden is not doing a lot to assuage those concerns, I think. He is not giving a lot of interviews. He has delivered fewer press conferences than like any president since the 1980s, since Ronald Reagan. He is only doing interviews, or not maybe only, but he is doing a lot of interviews that are just very softball, with like YouTube beauty influencers and Drew Barrymore, I think, are people he has talked to recently. I'm not making that up, right? And that is quite obviously, I think, even though his staff would deny it, that is quite obviously driven by concerns amongst his staff that it's not worth the risk to do a hard interview because he might say something that is going to get him in trouble because he's not reliable, because he is a gaffe machine going back decades, not just in the last year or two. I mean, this was part of his public persona. This was how he was understood by the press, going back to 2008 at least. And so now he is an older gaffe machine, one who doesn't seem to do events outside of the hours of 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., right? Like, is just kind of not available.
He's a nighthawk. Jen Psaki used to say.
He did the Dark Brandon at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
That is true, but it is relatively unusual to see him, sort of out and about early or late, and he has a fairly constrained and confined schedule. He's not giving a lot of interviews. He is, in some ways, playing into the perception that he is old and tired and not capable, and that is affecting his standing within the Democratic Party, not just with people who were never going to vote for him anyway.
All right, related topic that will be throwing off both political and governance news in the coming days and weeks and potentially months from Washington is that House Republicans on Wednesday managed to convert their very narrow majority into a very narrowly passed piece of legislation, spelling out their conditions for a deal to raise the debt ceiling limit on how much money the federal government can borrow. The Limit, Save, Grow Act of 2023, which is great because it doesn't have a stupid acronym, would, if somehow signed into law, which it will not be, block the Biden administration's student debt forgiveness. It'll cancel unspent COVID relief funds. undo some green energy tax credits, revoke the $80 billion to boost the IRS, and most importantly, ratchet down the annual discretionary budget all the way back to fiscal year 2022, and then institute a 1% annual spending growth cap afterwards for a decade. The bill reportedly caught the White House off guard. They'd expected House Republicans to engage in the usual circular firing squad. Katherine, what significance, if any, do you attach to the passage of this bill, and how, if at all, does it alter your betting hunch, your predictus on what an eventual debt ceiling compromise and or long-term budget horror outlook will look like?
Yeah, I just want to offer you Politico's framing of what happened. That vote is kicking off a new phase in the high-stakes standoff that will test Democrats' ability to stay united and follow through on their threats to make vulnerable GOP lawmakers pay for supporting a politically toxic plan. Just like...
Love Politico. Love it.
Calm down with your word selection, Politico. So listen, this is, we talked about this when the whole kerfuffle around the speakership was going down, and how actually a lot of the demands of these folks that we otherwise did not think were the best and brightest of America's legislature, with respect to spending and with respect to the debt ceiling, were pretty good. And like that list that you just made, yes to all those things, right? My perhaps overly cynical impression is that this means nothing at all. And that is why, for instance, Politico and the Washington Post and others have covered this almost exclusively through the lens of, Biden now has to shift his rhetoric, because his rhetoric, quite fairly, has been like, show me what you want to do. Give me a plan. And until then, I'm not going to negotiate with your like cloud of outrage. And now they did. And so now Biden has to like say different words while not caring at all what they want.
Nick Gillespie, speaking of watch your language, the Bulwark, which from what I understand is supposed to be a right of center publication, has a piece out from Norm Ornstein.
Speaking of fossils.
And here's the headline: Staying clear-eyed about Republican radicalism on the debt ceiling. Subhead: Resist the temptation to downplay the danger or normalize the GOP's recklessness. And he further in the story talks about that this is the most tangible threat to the full faith and credit of the United States in our lifetimes. And in Norm's case,
really?
that's a span. Nick Gillespie.
Yeah.
So
So even more than like the shutdowns in during the Obama years or Clinton years, things like that. One of the things that's interesting about the debt limit debates, and it's kind of nice that we're having one again because they kind of went missing, particularly under Trump and COVID and things like that, is that at least we're talking about.
Go missing. Republicans just suspended the debt limit completely.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like we didn't have it. Yeah,
care
like it was
anymore because Trump is president.
Exactly. In the same way that in 2006, then Senator Barack Obama was like, there's no fucking way we should raise the debt limit. God damn it, we're America. And then it's like, oh yeah, you know what? Like when I'm president, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense not to raise the debt limit. My main point is most debt limit increases, since budgeting changes in the 70s have been what were called dirty. They have something connected to them. So you throw in, a bagatelle or two to say, okay, we're cutting this. That third Marine, all harmonica marching band. It's like, you guys, you're down to 5 harmonicas instead of 25 or something like that. But there's always been something connected. What I loathe about this deal is that there will be some kind of condition put on it, and you outlined a bunch of them. Another one was adding work requirements to get SNAP benefits if you're, under 50 or something like that. And some of those, make sense. Some of them don't. They don't really address anything because all of the debt limit stuff also doesn't deal with, the 70% of automatic government spending that is entitlements and interest on the debt. So these are kind of phony debates, but it's nice to have them. The thing that Ornstein and other people are talking about is, it is just fear mongering. The government is not going to, default on its debt. And the main problem to America's, the full faith and credit in the government is not the debt limit. It is the long-term spending where we are not doing anything at all to control national debt and the effects that has on long-term economic growth. So
Peter
Ornstein is wrong.
Peter, pick up that baton from Nick. But before you do, I just want to say I will suggest that they attach a rider that no more COVID spending should be earmarked for sports venue facilities, because a lot has, including the Field of Dreams project out in Dyersville, Iowa. And yes, that's now a bingo card. Yes,
the
Nick?
COVID spending should go away. And I'm going to put this on a bodega that's on Lexington Avenue and 39. So this really is the data point that explains everything. For the first time since the pandemic, the guys took down this incredible wall of Playtex or whatever the fuck it's called, flexible glass, so that you no longer have to kind of like weave your hands under to hand them your credit card where they could, just charge whatever you wanted, et cetera. But it's all gone. It's like they were the last place. It's like my doctor's offices have all stopped wearing masks and stuff like that. It's like COVID is over. Definitely stop spending anything that was earmarked for COVID.
There was a headline in the New York Times literally yesterday saying, like, is the pandemic finally over?
Biden has said that.
Not
so it's
ready
like,
it's the New York Times, though. They're a little bit more hardcore. Peter, talk about that entitlement piece of it in terms of what its role is or lack thereof in both this deal and in our eventual sooner rather than later
point
doom.
Number one, you will be happy to discover, maybe not that happy, but happy to find that the Republican bill actually does prohibit spending any more of the COVID relief funds. So any of the money that is not spent cannot be spent. However, it's only about $30 billion at this point out of about $6 trillion. So it's not no savings. $30 billion is kind of a lot of money, but in the scheme of things, it's not very much money. And even in the scheme of, the scheme of COVID relief funds, it's couch change. So the entitlement portion of this is that there is no meaningful entitlement portion of this. The closest thing we get to an entitlement reform out of all of this is the suggestion that there should be work requirements for Medicaid. So Medicaid is the joint federal state program for the poor and disabled that was expanded under Obamacare. And the joint federal state part of this is important. Because the way they are going to save money on Medicaid through work requirements is that it's just going to end up foisting a bunch of spending back onto the states. So it does cut spending at the federal level, but because of the way the shares work out, and it's a quite complicated formula that's different in different states, but because the way all of this works out, just like the net effect of this is that states end up spending more so that the federal government's budget looks better. Medicaid work requirements, like I'm in favor of work requirements for welfare. I think they are often like, to the extent we're going to have welfare, I think they are good, and that it is like that should be part of it. But I actually don't think that they make much sense in the context of Medicaid. And it's also just, even if you think it's a good idea, it's such a nothing burger of a reform. At the same time here, there's a bunch to like about this plan. In particular, the big savings numbers, where basically they're going to roll back discretionary spending to where it was before that giant $1.7 trillion omnibus passed at the end of last year. And that's not crazy. That's not radical. That's not an insane thing to do. And they're still going to let the budget, that part of the budget, grow in coming years. It's just that that growth is capped. So it's not that they're going to spend less money. They're just going to spend less money than we would spend on our current trajectory. And yet, Chuck Schumer this morning is sending out letters to the press and to his fellow Democrats, talking about how Democrats are going to respond here, saying the Senate will show the public what this bill truly is. Beginning this week, our committees will begin to hold hearings to expose the true impact of this reckless legislation on everyday Americans. He called it dangerous. Right, reckless and dangerous is rolling back spending to 2022 and only letting it grow at 1% per year rather than the rate that it's going to grow, only letting the debt grow at half the rate that it's scheduled to grow at right now. Like the fact that that is reckless and dangerous in Congress is the problem and is why we are in the debt situation, is why we are in the unsustainable fiscal situation that we are in right now.
We're going to get to our listener email question of the week here in a moment. But first, Andrew Heaton is one of the funny people in Reason TV videos, such as Libertarian Star Trek and Libertarian Star Wars. So it won't surprise you to discover that he hosts a science fiction podcast called Alienating the Audience. Alienating the Audience does deep dives on science fiction, like Robert A. Heinlein's Free Love Libertarianism, The Economics of Dune, Kurt Vonnegut and the Warfare State, and how Star Wars Andor loves public choice theory. Guests on the show have included Peter Boghossian on what the first contact with aliens will be like, or has been like, maybe. Jonathan Lass from The Bulwark, Defending the Empire. Tim Sandifer, the Goldwater Institute on Star Trek and the Cold War. And even our own Katherine Mangu-Ward is joined to discuss the work of Dan Simmons. If you don't like science fiction, do not listen to Alienating the Audience, as there is an excellent chance your virginity will grow back. But if you do like science fiction with a little extra dollop of politics and economics, served fresh by a mid-level comedian, then check out Alienating the Audience wherever you get your podcasts. Do it today. You'll be glad you did. Okay, reminder to email us your brief queries to roundtable@reason.com. And shout out to everyone who asked questions at the live event. You were trained. They were brief and to the point, and they weren't even speeches. That was great. This one comes from Anna Gorish, and I pronounced it right, I think, because I really wanted to say Gorsuch. She writes, in part, my core question, arises from the coverage of Joe Biden's presidential announcements. Keeping in the theme, people, specifically references to things like a candidate's legislative agenda or an incumbent's legislative accomplishments are ubiquitous and have been for some time. I'm sorry, but when did we get so comfortable with openly asking the executive branch for a legislative agenda? At this point, Roe is overturned. In practical terms, does it still matter what the president thinks about abortion? Shall we expect this to be decided by executive order? This is happening amidst increasing calls to tear into the Supreme Court. It seems that we are moving towards having just one branch of government, with the president playing the dual roles of national parent and Santa Claus. Most alarming, many seem to believe that this is a good idea. So, is this new? Is it a problem? Can it be fixed? Or are we free-falling at this point towards something more like oligarchy? Biden's only semi-serious opponent at this moment is a Kennedy for the love of all that is holy. I fear the real problem is the electorate, and that can't be fixed. Katherine, answer that question without just seizing on that last sentence.
I will be brave. So I actually, upon reading this question, thought, well, whenever this happened, it was like before I started paying attention to politics, right? Like this has always been true as far as I have known. And I agree with the letter writer sentiments that it feels bad and wrong. But so I did a little researching. I went over to JSTOR to look and see if there were any academic papers on this. And I found a paper from 1988 that begins, "The president has come to be known as our chief legislator within the past 50 years. So I guess this has just functionally always been true, but also it's Franklin Roosevelt's fault. Like maybe that's the answer.
Herbert Hoover. Hoover promised a chicken in every pot, if that's not a bold legislative agenda.
Yeah, I mean, it very much speaks to a kind of oligopolistic approach, and it does feel like this system is working badly, especially with respect to creating massive entitlements and kind of budgetary liabilities that can't be undone because there is no one anywhere in the room to undo them.
Nick, what say you?
At the risk of alienating our one of our listeners every bit as much as Andrew Heaton alienates his audience on his science fiction podcast, I think this is a really dumb question. And for at least all of the 20th century, every president, said, hey, when I get elected, this is what I'm going to try to do. And it doesn't mean that the president is a fascistic leader or anything like that. It's like how you get elected. The president is supposed to have a vision for the country, and that takes the form of a platform with various things that you say, if I am elected, I am going to try to do X, Y, and Z. It's not any different than it is now than it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And it doesn't, it's not the problem. Who's going to vote for somebody who is like, I will be elected president and I will faithfully execute all the laws that are passed by Congress? Like
me,
then we should have
Catherine's
chicken in the White House, a chicken who sits in the White House and just pecks at things and hopefully, signs their name, put ink on their beak, and then just have them sign whatever is put on the desk. But so I think it's a ridiculous question, and it's besides the point, because you want presidents who are, who have a vision for the country. And preferably we elect one that is a vision that isn't horrifying and isn't about subsidizing depends for, the increasingly elderly people in our population, and actually do something to unleash economic growth, to increase individual liberty. And all of that's going to take laws being passed too.
I just want to say, not a ridiculous question. I'll get to my point later, but make Calvin Coolidge again is my new slogan, and answer to
Calvin Coolidge, by the way, did promise.
Jesus Christ.
Calvin Coolidge did promise to do a lot of stuff, including he signed the worst immigration bill in American history. Calvin Coolidge, I don't get you people where you're like, I hate all presidents equally, blah, 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 but like Calvin Coolidge is okay. Calvin Coolidge is a fucking asshole. And, if he had been elected in 1920, and maybe this would be a good thing for the country, I would not be here. Because my Italian grandmother would not have been able to get back in the country. Why you got to
sell Calvin Coolidge so effectively, Nick?
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, like, Calvin Coolidge isn't your friend any more, than Herbert Hoover or Franklin Roosevelt.
No,
and it's not to say there aren't better or worse presidents, but Coolidge is not great.
He had an approach to the presidency on this question, regardless of his legislative or whatever he signed into law and campaigned on and did that was awful. That was a more humble conception of the executive, which resonates more with me. Peter, answer the question, please.
To some extent, Catherine's right. This goes back to the Great Society. In another way, you can trace this back to the 1974 Congressional Budget and Impoundment Act, right? Like that created the modern budget process, which starts with the president submitting a budget that Congress can then ignore if they want. But that budget each year it's not exactly a set of legislative proposals in the sense of, I want to do this extra special thing, but it is like, here's kind of what I think Congress should be doing on their core responsibility, which is passing a budget. Also, presidents campaign. And they campaign on legislative promises, right? Like on things that they want to do. And so Biden had a legislative agenda when he was running for president. And I think it's just accurate to describe his legislative agenda as his legislative agenda. I do think this questioner gets to an actual problem with the United States, like the way the federal government operates right now, which is that we have a presidential system that increasingly kind of sort of wants to operate like a parliamentary system. And we have tried, I won't say we on this podcast, but our policymakers and our elected officials at the federal level have tried to wedge features of a parliamentary system into a presidential system. And it's not quite that it's totally dysfunctional, but it creates a lot of problems, and those problems are in some sense encompassed by the fact that we call the legislative agenda the president's legislative agenda, because functionally the president is the leader of his party, or her, if that happens, right? The president is the leader of the party, and they are the ones they are the person who is setting the agenda and saying, here is what we are going to do. And then Congress kind of goes and sort of tries to figure it out. But I mean, in the end, I think, I fear the problem is the electorate. and that can't be fixed?
The problem is also Congress.
Yes, also that.
Because the president can't do anything unless it comes across his desk.
But the electorate,
and this is something I think we all agree on. And the electorate, what we really need to be doing is targeting our Congress people, if in fact they are people, and holding them accountable.
You will see over time, as we always should look at history through the lens of transcripts of State of the Union speeches. And the one big difference, as Jim Healy wrote in our Cult of the Presidency cover story back in 2008, based on this book, that was handed as a letter to the Congress, a report on the state of our union by the president from basically Thomas Jefferson through Woodrow Wilson, who changed that. And the idea from Jefferson's point of view was that it's a bit imperious to sit there and try to browbeat the legislature into telling it what it should do. Wilson started to change that, and it's been in the bad way, in my estimation, ever since. And probably starting with Franklin Delano Roosevelt with the New Deal, which is it is a thing that he's calling and he's putting together, and he's trying to pack the court and ram it through and all this kind of stuff. Harry Truman's The Square Deal is a big State of the Union address, attempt to do that. The Great Society. You still see some pockets within the speechcraft that occasionally used to nod to that the legislature had its own prerogatives to originate legislation, but it just lessens over time and then disappears. Richard Nixon goosed it a lot because he had a very ambitious domestic agenda, a lot of which got passed. It's a lot of the regulatory agencies that we still have. And he's pretty vigorous.
So did Reagan.
Pretty
Reagan ran on the new federalism.
Right. But there used to be nods in the direction. There aren't anymore, and I don't expect them to be at any time soon unless it's post mushroom cloud. All right. Speaking of mushroom clouds, lightning round time. This is last week. House Republicans subjected some unfriendly grilling onto the grill of Randi Weingarten, the president of the powerful American Federation of Teachers Union. They were particularly interested in her villainous, that's my word, role in public school COVID shutdowns after most of the rest of the world and a vast majority of American private schools had already reopened. Weingarten was defiant as usual and continued her very long at this point gaslighting campaign to portray herself as actually we were so in favor of opening schools ever since spring of 2020. Twice last week, very humorously, Weingarten's tweets to that effect, a little video clip job, showing her saying, we really want schools to open, were given those little corrective addenda on Twitter Notes, which is the best Elon Musk innovation as far as I can tell to Twitter, or maybe the only good one. She still got the kid gloves treatment by New York Times Magazine over the weekend, which just ran a very classic Republicans pounce story. Here's a selection. Weingarten is 65 and just over 5 feet tall. She is Jewish and openly gay. She's married to a rabbi and lives in Upper Manhattan. We learned this in paragraph 2. And then shortly thereafter, the pandemic and the ongoing culture wars over race and gender shifted America's educational landscape and with it the political landscape. Yes, that is probably what explains why people are really mad at this person who had incredibly outsized influence over shutting down public schools in ways that didn't happen in the rest of the world. Damn you all to hell. This is my lightning round. It's not a lightning because I could go on about it all day, but one sentence criticisms of Randi Weingarten. Peter, you go first.
Oh, man. The best moment from the congressional hearing was the one captured by Mary Catherine Ham on Twitter, where Randi Weingarten's just I'm 65. I can't remember everything. She's just what, you expect me to actually know what I said 2 years ago about probably the single most important debate of her tenure as a top union person here? Just incredible. The other thing that is worth remembering here is that as all of this was playing out in 2020 and 21, a big talking point for the teachers unions was that they needed an awful lot of money to reopen schools. And so in the American Rescue Plan and the CARES Act, they got something like $180 billion. That is a lot of money. A whole lot of money. And guess what they did not do with it? Reopen schools.
Correct. Katherine?
I hated Randi Weingarten before it was cool because she's also really, really bad on charter schools. And so I just want credit for that.
Here's a cookie.
Thank you.
A gold star.
Honestly, I do want more people to just give me cookies for being right about Randi Weingarten. But the other thing that I remain just completely furious about and refuse to get over, even though it is really quite petty, was the teachers have to be in the front of line for vaccines. Also, we will not be showing up at work. That thing, like Randi Weingarten said that thing a bunch of places. Her people said that at the state level, the local level. The rage that I still feel.
Nick?
I loved the community notes that you mentioned, Matt, being put on Twitter, because I still love Twitter and social media. And the great thing about it is it allows the hoi polloi to talk back in public. And, a bunch of her pinned tweets immediately were given those community notes, which are just, legitimate kind of questions or larger context about the bullshit that the tweeter is saying. And so to me, all is right with the world.
All right, let's go to our end of podcast, what we have all been consuming in the cultural arena. Why don't we spin the roulette wheel and go first with Peter?
I watched The Covenant, the new movie starring Jake Gyllenhaal, directed by Guy Ritchie, who is like a sort of former British bad boy director, like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch is where he got his start. But since the pandemic sort of upended the movie industry, he has released 3 movies. This is one of them. And it is a movie that is not quite based on a true story, but it is based on a true idea. It is about a soldier in Afghanistan who is working with an interpreter. He and the soldier and his platoon or whatever, the guys he's working with, most of the guys he's working with die, and he and his interpreter do manage to escape, and then he gets shot, and his interpreter drags him back to the military base, and then he gets brought home back to the United States, and his interpreter is left in Afghanistan as the Taliban has taken over. He's in hiding, and so he goes back, of course, to rescue him himself with the help of some private security forces. And it is probably the best action movie I have ever seen that is not only about the stupidity of war and the pointlessness of it all, because there's a lot at the beginning of the movie just about how the troops are being sent on these absolutely idiotic missions. Their time is being wasted. They have no idea what they're doing. It's demoralizing. Like, the morale is really bad, even though these are like quite competent, quite smart and capable dudes who are like able to, who should be able to affect positive change in the world. And they're like, what are we doing here? And they don't have any idea. But then it turns into a movie about the insanity of the U.S. immigration system. And so there is a big sequence at the end of the second act that is unlike anything I think I've ever seen in a mainstream production before, where Jake Gyllenhaal he's back at his home in California, and he's trying to figure out how to get the visa that was promised to all of the interpreters. And so again, this isn't a specific true story, but this is a true thing, is that all of the interpreters who worked with U.S. forces were promised access to a special visa, and then many of them were not given it or had a very, very hard time accessing it. And Jake Gyllenhaal, like the sequence is just Jake Gyllenhaal on the phone with the immigration services, and they're just dicking him around, and they're just being absolutely useless, making him stay on the phone, right, on hold, like not giving him answers, giving him wrong answers, making him fill out forms that can't be filled out because the person he's trying to rescue is in hiding and he can't come out in the open because they will be killed. And it's just like it's very effective. It just works on a kind of like moment to moment level of tension, but it's also like a very sharp and pointed critique of both, I think, the U.S. intervention in Afghanistan, and even more so in the way we treated our partners there, and in the absolute bonkers insanity of how we do immigration in the United States. Very good movie, and also like surprisingly libertarian and reasony in its themes.
Nick, what did you consume?
I watched Beef, which is on Netflix, directed by Lee Sung-jin and starring Stephen Yoon and Ali Wong. It is a Korean drama, and I guess I will specify, or not a Korean drama, it's a Korean-American drama, and which mixes in with a bunch of other Asian groups. It is a great short, dark comedy. Power through the first 2 episodes, which myself and a bunch of other people I know who saw it were intrigued but not that into it. It just is an incredible study of race, class, gender, and rage. Everybody in this show is pissed off for one reason or another, and then it intersects because one of the characters, or 2 of the characters, almost get into a car accident in a parking lot, and then there's a road rage incident, and everything unfolds from that. It's brilliant. It's funny. It is great because it is about Asian American identity, particularly Korean and to some degree Vietnamese, but it uses that as a backdrop to explore the different ways that we all Americans come from different places that change how we interact with each other, and oftentimes in really terrible, awful ways. There's also an inadvertent scene. So this touches, all of the bases, and then goes back to first base again. There's an inadvertent a scene where 2 of the main characters inadvertently eat berries in the wild and have a kind of psychedelic trip where they kind of commune with each other. That is both beautiful and completely out of left field, and is one of the best representations of a trip that I've ever seen. All in the context of this domestic drama that is just fantastic. So Beef, watch it. It's really, really good. And the rage factor is what really, it makes it perfect for the current moment, I think, in America.
Katherine, what did you consume?
Yeah, I read the hottest new essay from 1644 this weekend. I'm just going to suggest that everybody return to John Milton's Areopagitica if you have read it before, or read it for the first time if you have not. I was at a Liberty Fund conference this weekend. It was organized with Reason. It was a good time, but it's an absolute banger. Like, I really cannot emphasize enough what a delight it is to read from the darkest depths of history, right? From inside the height of the English Civil War. And John Milton is just out here saying, give me the liberty to know, to utter, and to argue freely according to conscience above all liberties. He's just, why could he figure this out in 1644? And we still today are like trying to fight these fights in the stupidest possible way.
Wait, Biden's campaigning on freedom.
Cool.
Biden wouldn't be able to campaign in John Milton's England,
right?
Because he's Catholic.
So, in fact, he is while wildly ahead of his time, still also a product of it. There's some bits in here about how, right, when we said everyone should speak freely and be allowed to hold office and run a printing press, we definitely didn't mean like Catholics or atheists or anything. So, calm down there. But yeah, I will leave you with just one other quote. Believe it, lords and commons, they who counsel ye to such a suppressing, that is the suppressing of other people's free speech, do as good as bid ye suppress yourselves, and I will soon show how. And show is spelled SHEW, which makes it that much better. Mm. John Milton, pick it up. You'll be glad you did.
Milton is so fantastic, and I don't think there's a single author who you encounter in high school, certainly, and maybe in college, where all of the pleasure and joy and fire of him is completely drained out by the way we are told to approach him on bended knee with your head down, being quiet, and just listen to the beauty of his poetry or something. And this guy was a true radical in terms of free speech, in terms of free conscience. He wrote the case to execute Charles I. He was in Cromwell's cabinet. He is such an incredible fucking, politically charged poet who gets dullified, I don't think like anybody else, at least in my experience and my kids' experience growing up. My ex-wife is a Milton scholar and recovered him for me and I guess for all of her students in that political dimension, which is just fantastic and very libertarian.
I'm happy to say my education was shoddy enough that I was not introduced to Milton in high school, so I was able to come to it at least a little fresher later in life, and that probably saved him for me.
I was introduced to Bill Melton in high school or elementary school.
Also fiery and political, calling for the head of fellow members and managers.
Speaking of mid-'70s cultural flotsam and jetsam, I'm going to pose my cultural consumption as a test of Nick Gillespie's bottomless well of pointless cultural trivia. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 data points. That's it, Nick. See if you can come up with it. Point.
I've already lost. So
untrue. You've lost because you have to listen to me talk. One is a movie in the mid-'70s. Don't answer yet. And then 2, it came to me to think about this movie because I heard my 8-year-old, who, like all kids apparently in New York City, play as a playground game, Mafia. And so was talking in an exaggerated wise guys, see, type of patter or close enough to it that my brain said, oh, that reminds me of Nick Gillespie.
Is it Bugsy Malone?
Boom! Right there. Undefeated.
Is that right?
Undefeated Nick Gillespie right there. I just wanted to prove that's how it works. He can do it. I can sum it up. 1976 movie, Alan Parker's directorial debut, is an all-children's gangster movie musical with songs by Paul Williams that sound exactly like Harry Nilsson.
Who is a must-follow on Instagram.
Absolutely
and,
right.
Twitter, if he's on Twitter.
If he's alive, and he is somehow. He tried everything to not
He's
be.
He's very active on Instagram.
He's great. You will know and love him as the little guy in the blue powder suit from Cannonball Run with the big guy. Whatever. He was this bizarre character, but he was a great singer-songwriter. And his music graces the movie, except for the fact that it was all recorded with him singing and other adults. And then like Scott Baio, who's like 10, would come out and mouth it with his sort of adult voice. But
they also use guns that shoot whipped cream
yes.
or fire hose cream or something.
Somehow this is a G-rated movie back when there weren't a lot of categories. They use splurge guns. So the movie starts with, and spoiler alert, but it's just all classic gangster movie. They find a guy in an alleyway, presumably in New York, and then the 4 guys come out of the car and they line him up with the guns, and then they shoot him with splurge guns, and then that's it. He's cashiered, and it's a fight between Fat Sam and Dandy Dan, and it's just there's no adults, and it's never really like talked about, and it's all a semi-straight but pretty comedic gangster movie, and it's really great to watch with an 8-year-old because the 8-year-old just loves the fact that it's kids playing adult stuff, including to a disturbingly effective degree Jodie Foster. At age 12 is out there just so incredibly like charismatic and alluring, and it's borderline disturbing.
You're starting to sound a little bit like John Hinckley Jr.
I identify with him a lot as a singer-songwriter, but also Scott Baio just like totally killing it. That was his first role as well, and just like charismatic and super good looking and interesting. And then the best is that there's this actor, the guy who plays Fat Sam. And Nick, you need to go watch this immediately because he's an Italian and he's always slipping into and talking with his hands, and he's got like a caterpillar eyebrows. And I looked him up. It's like, God, he was so good. Those 3 were by far the best in this movie. I don't remember, I don't know what his backstory is. And the backstory is fantastic. Alan Parker, the director, came to Brooklyn and went into a Catholic school. Italian school and said, "Who is the worst kid in this class?" And everybody pointed at little John Cassisi in the back, like that guy there. It's like, okay, you're my guy, and cast him as Fat Sam, the beleaguered mafia boss who has to get the Irish Italian slick Wonder Boy, Scott Baio playing Bugsy Malone, to help him as he's being subsumed by Dandy Dan. But so like, oh, and what happened to John Cassisi? He only played one more role, really, which was as a character in the Abe Vigoda vehicle Fish. And then he retired and got into construction, and then became the head of construction for Citigroup, and then got rung up on federal charges and was serving 2 to 6 last I looked for racketeering. It's so
I think I might have just beaten Elden Ring from the beginning to end while you were just saying that.
Just while Matt was talking. Oh my God.
Yeah. So
that was
good.
Rhapsodic, man.
The Jodie Foster bits, like I heard those.
Yeah, well, it breaks right through the creepiness. Okay,
Matt,
yes,
you might want to another early 70s movie that your daughter might like is Day of the Dolphin.
Oh,
the movie with George C. Scott where he is unwittingly training dolphins to assassinate the president of the United States.
Oh, just sold.
So it's kind of like Flipper, but with an attitude. And it came up in my one of my social media feeds, and it is such a terribly funny movie with animals, and you got to see it to believe it. It's the movie that Roman Polanski was directing when he fled the country, and so Mike Nichols took over and did a terrible job.
It's like a Free Willy were a Hitman movie.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
So, in other words, sold. All right, that's all the ruminations that we have time for on this episode of the Reason Roundtable podcast. Again, thanks to everyone who came out. Go to all of our podcasts, reason.com/podcast. Also, our events there. Nick, tonight's a little bit too quick on the turnaround. Are there future events you want to point to people in New York City with the various activities that you are involved with?
The best thing that people can do is go to reason.com/newsletters and then sign up for the NYC events newsletter. And then you'll get a lot of spam email about everything we're doing in New York. Or you can always go to reason.com/events and see what we're up to all over the galaxy.
Bada boom. Thank you, everyone. Go to reason.com/donate if you want to give us money. That's it. See you next week. Bye.